Hi, True Nature Medicine Tribe. It is Sarah Jane from Access Your True Nature, and I'm just jumping in here quickly. I've got a pretty crazy day ahead, and the second part of the shadow dancing class, turning trauma and broken record and stories and blind spots into truths and triumphs, and getting out of those old triggers that keep you stuck doing the same thing over and over again. So I've been thinking a lot about what kind of fell out of my mouth yesterday, where I sort of put it out there that I wanted to create a container, a nest, so to speak, like that little weaver bird in my garden that I was speaking of the other day, that builds and builds and builds and keeps building his nests, and the mama bird comes along, and she kept breaking it because it wasn't up to her standards of safety. To grow her baby weavers, and he just never went into a place of judgment of saying, oh my god, I'm never going to get this right, and I'm never going to please my missus, and I may as well just give up, I'm so useless. He just kept going until his nest was safe and solid, even in these gusty winds that are coming up in September. And our lack of self-belief isn't a personal failing. It's not that we're internally deficient or lack some confident gene that everybody else has and you don't. And I find it really surprising. It's human beings seem to be the only living creatures on the planet that go into the wrongness of themselves, of not believing in their God-given talents, and probably likely, in all the work I've done with thousands of people over the last, I don't know, 20 years, and working with my own core woundings and my own shadow parts, probably because our parents never got believed in either. Who knows how long this lack of belief goes back. And frankly, this job of being believed in is a village-sized job. It's part of the herd. We need a herd to show us that they believe in us. It's just too big to do on your own. It's too much to ask of parents, and it might not actually be a job that's suited for parents particularly either. Surely aunts and uncles and grandparents have some important role in fostering how we grow in our belief of ourselves, and surely the rest of the community plays some role, but I think it's really deeper than that. And when I talk about being believed in, I mean something a lot deeper than looking at a child or an adult that still has these child parts that feel that they're not heard or not seen or not believed in, that they can just do anything. I certainly don't mean that. I mean something more along the lines of a community expecting the arrival of a child and considering that this child might be coming into their lives from somewhere, and that it might be bringing with it in its tiny closed little fists as it emerges out of that womb, like we all did, some sort of gift for the community that's bigger than all of them. It's unique, and it's special to each and every one of us. I'm talking about the community believing that its well-being hinges on those gifts, just like our ancestors knew that to be true, of being really properly identified and fostered into their full fruition. I'm talking about the community, its elders in particular, which we've lost these days, clearly seeing the seeds that have been handed down to the village from those who came before, in the form of this bright new little being, and doing their absolute best to ascertain the proper role for them to grow into. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that in wondering how I can build a sense of community, a nest that really is the village, that grows us back into trusting and owning that we're believable. And most of the time you hear in marketing, and you hear from people in business, that niches to target market. And I had a really hard time with this for a long time, because it just felt so closed and it felt so constricting, you know. So I like to tend to define it as something like your role in the community. And it comes from the old French verb nicher, which means to make a nest. And I love that. I speak French really badly. Hi. I'm amazed how you got... and Jana, thank you. I'm not really that comfortable with video. It's pretty interesting how every day I kind of just show up. And yeah, I think the more that we practice something, the more that people just take that leap of faith, and having you tune in to my little videos every day, that's what makes me keep doing them, even though I'd rather not, even though I would prefer to hide under audio. But yeah, I've definitely got more comfortable over the weeks of committing to show up and give more generously and share what I know in a bigger way. It's definitely been an interesting journey. Yeah, I might have to do a whole nother Facebook video about that. But yeah, so you know, niching. Thank you, Anjana, for that acknowledgement. You know, and this is part of what is building a nest. You know, it's worth noting that when we're building nests, when we're building a container or a space to share our gifts with the world, that we have to create our own safety. And this is really, you know, you've worked with me for over a year, so you really kind of know where I'm kind of getting at with that. But you know, to look at how we come into the world these days without the village to grow us. Some of us have more of that than others. I see a lot of people that have great communities and great extended families that do grow their children. But you know, the chicks in those little eggs, like my little weaver bird, they don't build the nest that they're going to be born in. They have no control over that. And for me, that role of culture needs to be, I think anyway, about supporting and helping the little beings to find their place in the world, to find their role. And some of you who know my story, you know, my father was never around as I grew up. He was always somewhere else, and when he did show up, let's just leave it at, it was never a very happy place or a safe place for me in that moment. So I never had a strong male role model growing up. And those male role models became men for me who I devoured in books. Like, let me think of a few that I could hardly understand when I was a child, like Leo Buscaglia and Stephen Covey and Tony Robbins and Greg Braden and the likes. And I was trying to elder myself with personal growth books, self-help books, because I didn't have those elders around. I never got to know my grandparents on either side of my family. And our sense of extended family, my cousins and aunts and uncles were very far away. My mother's brother was amazing. He was like my hero. He was a pilot, and he had big twinkly blue eyes, and he was really fit, and he was a teetotaler, and he just seemed to be so worldly and so knowledgeable. And my curious, intelligent, seeking Gemini personality, it was like I hungered for knowledge, I hungered for intelligence. But you know, that wasn't my mom's job. It wasn't even really my family's job. My two older sisters left home when I was still very young. You know, it's not a job that they, as my family, were even capable of doing on their own. It's just too big. And that personal growth scene is big. I've noticed these days, you know, life transformation and personal growth is very big on this whole confidence thing as something that you have to cultivate. After all, if you don't have it, who knows what might happen? Ooh, you know, scary. It's like a ticking time bomb. We don't know when it's going to go off. But if we don't become confident by a certain point, we're told that then it's going to be too late and the timer might run out and the bomb might explode, leaving you in a life of erroneous debris or quiet desperation. It's present in the way that we talk about confidence as something that we get. And I spoke a lot about this, and I had 27 amazing women on my summit talking about courage being something that is innately within you. It's not that desperation that we have to be terrified that it's, this bomb of not getting confident is going to leave you forgotten and not enough for the rest of your life. And I think a lot of that is about standing in the poverty of a very dismantled village, of a herd that no longer knows how to be a herd. And we're sort of left fending for our own identification, our own belief in ourselves of, who we're supposed to be in the world. And instead of understanding ourselves as part of a community, we're left to try and make sense of some static, atomized individual who is responsible for making themselves feel worthy. We're told that we need to parent ourselves, and I'm not arguing with this or suggesting this kind of therapy isn't vitally important work to do, and I'm grateful that the ones who do it are out there, but I'm suggesting that the existence of this work, there goes a little butterfly, and that need for it is a sign of this sort of deep lack and scarcity, this poverty mentality of the cultures that we're bringing in, and this collapse of the nest, of the niching, of the village, of the herd, the power of the pride mindedness, that heartfelt sense of belonging. And it's madness, of course we're all feeling desperate about it. I think we also forget how much of authentic confidence comes from real competence. And if you're good at something, that you will tend to feel confident about it. And when we are doing something we aren't good at, that somehow we failed. It's not a great feeling. And people, we've all been let down. We've been hurt. We've often made choices that we would rather not have when we didn't do a great job. And if we're an alive, empathic human being, and you're listening to this, it's just part of being human, isn't it? That we're going to feel bad about that, because in our hearts of hearts, we've never wanted to hurt someone. When someone isn't skilled in an area and is being asked to take on a big job in that arena, that appropriate kind of response is not, "Oh, you can do it, just believe in yourself." That's the crazy part. Is and as I was talking about yesterday, this is what I see in a lot of these networking circles and these support groups that are out there, that it's kind of like, give me your money and come on in and you can do it, but there's no sense of belonging. There's no nest, so to speak, to hold you in the places where you don't know whether you can do it. And in a traditional culture, you'd never become a medicine woman after taking a month's course or a year-long course. You'd be supported and mentored, and you'd apprentice to somebody. When I was learning Chinese medicine, I shadowed my acupuncturist Chinese medicine teacher for almost 2 years, and I still felt like I was just touching the surface of what that could contribute to my work. We all need support, and in the old days, you'd likely have been recognized as someone to groom for a specific role from a very young age. If a young person has a capacity or a fascination with stories, maybe they would become a storyteller. If they were athletic, maybe they would become a hunter. And if they were kind of drawn to crafting, maybe that would be where they would be guided into by someone that was really good at a craft, like stonemasonry or forging steel in the fire. And if they were drawn into a place that fits with them, not within the constructs of how, you know, people that are kids that are leaving school kind of have this linear approach that they have to fit within the boxes, but more from a freedom of, I don't know, a space of seeing where they believe in their own talents and capacities. You know, this culture, we're raised to conform. We have to fit in. You know, we have to be a cog in the wheel of industry and progress and all that crazy stuff. And I don't do business that way. I've never done creation that way. And I'm so grateful. I don't know where I got it from. But I did have some great mentors and support along the way who never told me who to be. I think they told me, why could I not be anything that I was physically good at? It wasn't about just saying, oh, go on and do it. You know, we're led so far astray, aren't we, from the reason that we might be here, the gifts that we brought in, the trust that our community would recognize in them, and that even finding our way back there is an absolute miracle. And finding our way back to that without help, well, you know, that's freaking miraculous. So I want to build a soft feathered nest, one that's bigger than what I can currently hold in my one-on-one practice and in my group programs. That's more of a collaboration that becomes bread, the mana, you know, to break bread together for sensitive, heart-filled women just like you. And my hope is that the connection, the work that we do, what we will do together in the masterminding, in the illumination, in the fire, will help us all ease our burden of where we feel we're responsible. That it's another step towards some sort of herd or village, so that those to come behind us, right, in the next generation, aren't left with too heavy burden of trying to figure out all their gifts on their own, or believing in themselves. And you know, the industry of believing in ourselves is often just a band-aid solution anyway, I think, for a much deeper wounding, which is why I like to get to root cause resolution of one, you know, finding out why you feel the way that you feel, or why you have a physical ailment or disease, which is just the opposite of easy, that's keeping you stuck in the same repetitive pattern of struggle, of feeling that you're unbelievable and everything else along with it. You know, it's an industry that's really covering up something that I just feel is so immense, and it's whispering to the sapling, water yourself, you know, be your own sun, be your own soil. And as Stephen Jenkins, who is one of my favorites, says, he says that if you're on the receiving end of that stuff long enough, what happens is that there is this little bud that grows up from you being bombarded with somebody being certain that you're lovable or whatever, no matter what you think, and that little bud is a bud of worthiness, that you didn't do anything to conjure or manufacture it. It's not an apathy, it's not a sort of merit badge that you get, that being loved or getting grieved or getting understood or seen. It just isn't. You know, it's more of a consequence that you've got sane people around you, and that's what it is. But if you have this bud of worthiness that somehow involuntary starts to take up room and you take on yourself, you know, that's the inevitable consequence of your ability to love somebody that's born there within yourself. Hi, Shirley. And I don't know if I'm making sense. But, you know, I love to absorb things that actually make me grow into that space, into that nest, that has been built for me to nurture me, to hold me safe when I'm not feeling safe. And I love Maya Angelou. I mean, she was just she had the most incredible ability to say words that just made my heart go, there it is, there it is. And I can't remember what she said, but it was something around being with a young guy, and he said, I'm depressed, and she said, you may be depressed, but while we're here together, you won't be depressed alone. And she just affirmed his feelings, and it wasn't that she was trying to change him. He was just being let known that he mattered enough to have company in the matter of feeling depressed. And I think in my moments of deep, dark despair, when I was feeling so alone, that was what I really wanted and needed more than anything. It was just that space to be held and know that I could be there and not have to try and do it on my own. That was the believable part, is yes, you are. You are depressed. And I want to create more of that space where we can just be with each other. And that's the difference between looking for a cure, trying to fix something, and being healed as being whole, of being able to receive and stay in the space of having a full range of emotions. And if you don't believe in yourself, then see if you can't walk your way toward believing in others and why they're here. And see if that can't be something more than a sort of a knee-jerk reflex blanket reaction of positive affirmations or mantras. And see if you can make it particular to those you meet as you soften your eyes a little to make out the types of seeds that carry within your deep aspects of the wounded psyche, that even though you're terrified to lose what you have perhaps held as sacred, or you've had no capacity to see or help others to plant those seeds so they can grow, that you start to tend to your own garden. And if you're lucky, and remember, luck is not that it falls out of the sky. You can't meditate yourself into abundance. It takes intentional creativity, and it takes a huge amount of commitment to do the work and show up and see if you just can't relax yourself, relax your fists, soften your gaze, come into heartfeltedness of hearing your heartbeat and seeing that it's bigger than you. And that way we can all start to learn, if you're lucky, to, you can learn to sit to weave a basket from somebody who knows how to do that really, really well, or learn how to tell stories or paint a picture. Shirley is one of the most inspiring artists that I wanted to have in my world. But yeah, how can we begin to help as the some parts that are all unique and different in the herd, in the village, and sit next to somebody and be able to see them and receive from them in learning how to weave something into that tapestry that we're all weaving in the interconnectedness of living. That is a bigger blanket that village may use one day. So it's good to distinguish, I think, in all healing work, the difference between healing and a cure. Cure means the problem is gone. Healing, for me, in the work that I do, is to inspire and empower people and believe that they're believable and that they can be their own medicine. There's some measure of wholeness there that's restorative. We're not taking anything away. And often, we don't find a cure, but we do the healing. And I think that's what is going to change things. That is the lifestyle medicine that I certainly I'm committed to bringing out into the world more and more every single day. So, perhaps a good question for today is to just ask yourself, are you planting the saplings, the seeds of your purpose, your envisioning of what you came here to grow into, alone in a crater of some devastating ground zero? Or are you going to plant your saplings in a forest of tall trees that can teach you how to grow into a very strong tree that can endure even the most challenging of storms and be a source of that growth for not just yourself, but for the village, for the herd, and for all those generations that are going to come after you, and turn that into a place worth coming home to. What if we were less concerned about getting confidence and more concerned about creating beauty? And what if this included beautifully expressed grief and loss and sadness and separation from a place of coming home to the heart, of healing that separation sickness, because we are standing up for creating beauty in our lives and in the world. I love David Rico. I don't know if you've read his book. It's a great one to put on your Kindle or your wish list of how to be an adult. And he says that our problem is not that as children our needs were unmet, but that as adults they were still unmourned. And neediness itself tells us a place of lack from others. All right, I'm back. So I'm just going to pull this up on my Kindle and I'm going to read it because I can't really remember the whole thing. But yeah, so he says that our problem is not that as children our needs were unmet, but that as adults they were still unmourned. Neediness itself tells us nothing about how much we need from others. It tells us how much we need to grieve the irrevocable, barren past and evoke our own inner sources of nurturance. What was missed can never be made up for, only mourned and let go of. We are grieving the irretrievable aspects of what we lost and the irreplaceable aspect of what we missed. Only these two rationalizations lead to the resolution of grief, because only these acknowledge, without denial, how truly bereft we were or are. From the pit of this deep admission that something is irrevocably over and done, we finally stand clear of the insatiable need to find it again from our parents or partner. To have sought it was to have denied how utter was its absence. Grief work done with consciousness builds self-esteem, since it shows us our courageous faithfulness to the reality of loss. It authenticates us as adults who can say yes to sadness, anger, and hurt. Such a heroic embrace of our own truth transforms emptiness into capacity. And this is where I love Jung, and I don't agree with everything, and I love people that I don't agree with in my life, because they grow me. But he says that your inner emptiness is actually concealing. Hang on, what does he say? Your inner emptiness conceals just as great a fullness if you only allow it. And I think that's key here, because people seeing us and believing us is what feeds us. It's our food, and we can't live without it, and we can't self-generate it either. We need the herd, we need the village, and we can question the thoughts that stop us from, seeing all the ways that we've been and are being affirmed every day by, simply the fact that we're alive. But we can't question the thoughts that we're worthless. But it's likely we even need help doing that. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's interesting. But you know, years ago, I remember listening to Jack Canfield and with the chicken soup with the soul books. That was a long time ago. It must have been about 20, 25 years ago, same time as Gary Zukav wrote Conversations of God. But you know, he ended up telling his listeners that even if no one else in the world believed in them, he did. You know, he used to say, "I believe in you. I believe in you," and that message was a very emotional place. I remember a whole mixture of things coming up for me in the feeling part of that. You know, it was beautiful and it was a very sincere message. It was the kind of message I'm imagining he could have used when he was younger. And it was also a very generic message, but you know, it was very genuine to the collective. It's kind of like a ghost of the real thing that had very little power to touch anyone in a lasting way, and it was an indictment of the culture that he felt accurately really needed the message at the time. And I'm kind of wondering, you know, how much have we actually changed since The Secret, since the law of attraction and all those things really was a growth spurt in our evolution of coming back to the heart, of coming home, of believing in ourselves. Because most of us didn't grow up believing in ourselves. We grew up not knowing our gifts or our strengths, and we grew up not really getting much of the emotional and spiritual food that we needed to become healthy human beings. That's certainly been my experience in my work with clients all over the world, that it is a global sense of loss, of grieving. And the most terrible part of this is you know, how normal it's become. You know, we look at the situation, if we see it as a situation at all, there's so much disassociation of that, and we've been talking a lot about that in the shadow working class. But you know, we imagine that it's always kind of been this way. That's the way that it is everywhere, and that's the way that it'll always be. And of course we tell ourselves that humans are plagued with self-doubt and we don't believe in ourselves. You know, that's how it is. There's a disassociation that it's not normal, it's not natural. It might be normal, but it's certainly not natural. It's not in our true nature to live like that. It's our birthright to know that we're believable. It's our birthright to be loved and to know how to love and to have a full spectrum of emotions without defining some good and some not. And you know, there are other cultures who don't go into these obsessive compulsive paranoia, these crazy points of views and neuroses and disease. Actually, you know, we all come from cultures that inherently knew that wasn't natural, and I think it's costly. You know, it's costing us a lot in our relationships, in our collective evolution, so to speak. And it asks a lot of us to see that, but in seeing it, in being able to be with it and slow everything down, and being willing to grieve the absence of it, I think it's our tears, that it's the water that's feeding the ground of making it fertile for the possibilities of the presence of heartfelt living, of living in our true nature, of being in the presence of being seen and heard and believable. It's happening and it's coming, you know, that it isn't that we don't believe in ourselves, but that we actually have to, that it starts with us, that we have to be responsible for our own journey. And if you don't believe in yourself, I don't blame you. You know, it's hard to do the shadow work. It's hard to go to the core. And it was never your job to try and do it or be it in the beginning anyway. You know, when someone says, "Oh, believe in yourself," it's so gut-wrenchingly empty. For me, there's a worthlessness in it. You know, it's just words, and words are not food. So much of the meaning of your life is in the hands of others, and the meaning making that they put by their actions and their non-actions is what keeps us hooked in this Mobius strip of not enoughness, of not being believable, of not standing in our own truth, of knowing what we stand for and what's true for us. You know, I've heard so many people the last couple of days saying to me, you know, I've never seen any value in myself. I've always struggled to believe. I've always struggled to try to see my value. I just can't see it, and it breaks my heart, because I see so much value and so much worth just in these stories, just in the resilience of how much they've endured and how much they've overcome. And that it's, you know, it sucks, actually, because a lot of times you're left feeling both validated and powerless at the same time. Validated because you feel like the struggle to build your own self-worth has never been successful, or powerless because maybe you don't have as much control over whatever it is that you'd hoped. And of course we don't. Hi, Michelle. Hi, TJ. Yeah, you know, so it doesn't mean there's nothing to do. It's more about what can I be in this moment to believe that just by my existence I matter. That's believable. You know, I'm not against pump up and motivation. I'm not, you know, I'm not a rah kind of speaker. I can't go there. You know, I'm not against that for the people that do it. But then what happens when you leave? You know, when you're all hyped up and then you go out and you feel more alone than you did before. I want to build a nest. Who wants to build a nest with me? You know, it's time. It's time to come home to the heart. Yeah. Anyone got some questions? No? All right. I think I'm going to leave it there today. I love the proverb. It's a Gaelic proverb. And don't ask me to speak Gaelic because I come from Irish genes. But yeah, Michelle. Yeah, you know, there's a beautiful proverb, and I think my mother told me that her mother used to say that to her, that a person by herself is not a person. And there is a deep sense of fracture in that. You know, the misidentification of who am I comes from who am I in believing that I have something to give to the herd, to the tribe, that makes it a bigger, better place for everybody. And, you know, the resistance to any kind of disturbance in just not knowing who you are is the disturbance. And I think our resistance to grieving is that we've just never had it before. We've never had the opportunity to be in deep grief. My pleasure, Michelle. Allow those emotions to come up and just track them. Yeah. And see, you know, my question to you would be, how can you hold yourself in a place of totally living into what you see as valuable for yourself? And that could just be your body, you know, your body working, the fact that you woke up today, really just tracking your emotions of where can you hold yourself in a space of a sense of safety in your nest to bring in your core values and align with that, and just start there. You know, it's just the baby steps. And I think that's the thing, is that we've never been given the manual on how to hold ourselves in a place of seeing ourselves as value or worth or contribution or love. You know, how do you love? Just the way that you love is a value. And you know, I think the more we live relationships with people that can hold us in that space of seeing our value when we can't, the more the belonging comes in the relationship. You know, it comes from knowing that I've lived well in knowing how it feels to be in relationship, rather, from the true definition of relationship being the distance of separation between two things, of looking at how can I bring or pull myself into myself and narrow the gap of where we've created this illusion of separation that we have to figure it out on our own, rather than asking for what we need as support, as the village, as the herd. And I think confidence is really that natural byproduct. I think we get confident not from something that we get outside, but from owning the parts of us that know that we're being supported in a way that develops our skillfulness in the expression of our natural gifts that others have helped you identify. So, get support. No, you're not alone. I'm not saying you can do anything. I'm not saying believe in yourself. I'm not saying you can do it, which can sometimes be tonic, but a lot of times I think it's more toxic. Because what is it in the first place? Sometimes you encourage people to keep going, and sometimes they encourage people to do foolish things. Sometimes people should not believe they have the capacity to do things. It's like, just because I watched a National Geographic or a documentary on brain surgery doesn't mean that I'm going to practice by digging in your brain. You just have to be confident in yourself. Or, sure, you can lead this group through this healing ceremony. You've taken ayahuasca once. Sometimes our confidence is misplaced, and I think that's where we need to be very aware of what we're creating and what we want to show up in our lives. Believing in ourselves in the way this culture asks us to seems to be a really impossible task. I've certainly struggled with that, because it was always based on what somebody else perceived as confidence to look for them. And our modern approach to confidence mistakes the sources of our strengths and the swagger, starting your stuff, that we might have, and ignores the gravity of